If a book is banned, it suggests there's something hazardous in it. But dangerous for whom? For you or for those in control? Throughout history, monarchs, churches, and governments have burnt books, suppressed ideas, and slaughtered authors, not because words may kill, but because they can liberate. The correct knowledge in the wrong hands, or rather in the right hands, can demolish civilizations, overturn dogmas, and expose embarrassing truths. History shows us a clear pattern. When power fears an idea, it seeks to erase it. But here's the biggest error they made. Ideas don't burn. From ancient Rome to the Soviet Union, from the Inquisition to the Cold War, these volumes have continued to exist. They have been concealed, smuggled, and read in secret because what's written in them is not just literature. They are manuals for learning how the world truly works and how you can play this game without being merely a pawn. And the most intriguing thing? Some of these novels were prohibited by competing administrations. Fascists and communists alike have censored them. Monarchies and revolutionaries have banned Machiavelli. Authoritarian and democratic administrations have burnt Brave New World. And if such diverse extremes have sought to hide the same texts, perhaps the problem is not with the books, but with those who don't want you to read them. But what about you? Will you follow the rules and overlook these works? Or will you do exactly what they don't want you to do? Today, we're going to look into 6 books that have been suppressed, persecuted, and banned. Books that challenged faiths, shook regimes, and questioned everything that was supposed to be true. The question isn't why they were prohibited. The question is, why haven't you read them yet? And to start this journey, there's no better location than the author who attacked the entire notion of good and evil, who exposed morality as a power game, and who was censored by competing regimes because his ideas were hazardous to any system that tried to control people's thoughts. The time has come to talk about Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche was never a thinker who brought consolation. On the contrary, his philosophy is a perpetual challenge to everything that Western society has established as truth. Beyond Good and Evil and the Genealogy of Morals not only criticize traditional morality, but also show its hidden origins, submission, and anger. That is why his views were prohibited in governments that purported to be opposites, yet had something in common: the dread of individual freedom. The Soviet Union outlawed his works because they considered them a danger to the socialist ideal, while the Nazi Authority tried to hijack and pervert his principles to promote the idea of racial superiority. Neither understood his actual thought. The German philosopher did not subscribe to any political ideology and, above all, hated any sort of group brainwashing. For him, any institution that enforced an ultimate moral code was, in fact, strangling human grandeur. His strongest critique was directed at Christian morality, which he described as a morality of the weak, a code formed by individuals who could not exert direct power, so they created an ethic that celebrated humility and sacrifice as virtues. He maintained that the history of morality is the history of the revenge of the resentful against the powerful. Traditional virtues, in his view, did not come from a supernatural principle, but from an impulse for self-preservation of those who had no other means of rule. This reasoning made him a menace to any government based on unthinking loyalty. Communism rejected him because his emphasis on the will to power was irreconcilable with the idea of collectivism. Fascism tried to kidnap him, ignoring that he rejected nationalism and any idea of state-imposed superiority. Religion opposed him because he said frankly that God is dead, not as a naive atheist cry, but as a diagnostic of modernity. Man could no longer hide behind faith to excuse his choices. His novels were regarded hazardous since they left no room for illusions. If morality is a construct, it may be demolished. If there are no absolute truths, any belief system can collapse. He did not give clear replacements for the principles he attacked, and that is precisely what makes his work so troubling. His thought demands that the reader face reality without ideological crutches, challenge what they deem right and wrong, and, above all, renounce the desire for external validation in order to create their own strength. Why read Nietzsche? Because he teaches us to mistrust what we have been taught as unchanging fact. His words are not a blueprint for living, but an invitation to reject comfortable certainties and explore the unfamiliar. His works are not harmful because they impose rules, but because they destroy them all. And if this deconstruction of morals was enough for governments and religions to want to obliterate his views, imagine the impact of a book that questioned not only values, but the fundamental authority to govern. The following work on this list attacked not morals, but the legitimacy of rulers. Thomas Paine's The Rights of Man did more than be censored. It fueled a revolution. Revolutions. Not every revolution begins with weapons. Some begin with words. Thomas Paine was not a general, but few men have had such an impact on political history. His publications not only supported freedom, but also taught how to obtain it. The Rights of Man was a frontal attack on monarchy and aristocracy, and for this reason it was suppressed, destroyed, and viewed as an existential threat by the governments of the period. England prohibited the text for an obvious reason. It did not only condemn the power of kings, it denied it utterly. Paine contended that monarchy was a fiction, supported by tradition and fear, and that true authority should reside in the hands of the people. To him, no government had the right to exist without the agreement of the governed. This may seem simple today, but in the 18th century, it constituted political heresy. To doubt the authority of monarchs was to question the natural order of the world. The impact of the book was instantaneous. Published in 1791 amid the height of the French Revolution, it became a symbol of the fight against absolutism. Its author not only backed the revolution, he rationalized it. He claimed that the people had not only the right but the obligation to topple tyrannical governments. For the European kings, this kind of thought could not be allowed. England proclaimed Paine a traitor, and he had to leave to France to avoid arrest. But the irony of history spares no one. The same guy who was hounded by the monarchs for defending the revolution was almost guillotined by the revolutionaries themselves. His concept of freedom was incompatible with the political terror that followed in France, and he was incarcerated for disagreeing with the extremists who now dominated the country. If there is one thing that his tragedy demonstrates, it is that power, whether monarchical or revolutionary, always fears individuals who cannot be controlled. What makes The Rights of Man an essential book? It is not merely a defense of freedom, but a warning about how authority is sustained by the manipulation of tradition, force, and the ignorance of those governed. Paine makes it apparent that rights are not concessions made by governments. They are intrinsic parts of human existence. He not only challenges the legitimacy of monarchy, but also warns of the risks of any system that does not have the people as sovereign. Reading this work today is not merely a historical exercise. It is a reminder that no authority should be accepted without examination. If the book was banned, it is because its precepts are hazardous for any authority that tries to impose its will without justification. And if an 18th century work is still considered as a threat by many countries around the world, perhaps its message is more current than it looks. But if Paine was prohibited for fighting monarchy, the next author on this list was censored for challenging something much more untouchable: the entire idea of censorship. Areopagitica. Few writings have questioned power as strongly as Areopagitica. In 1644, while England was torn apart by civil war, John Milton wrote one of the most influential manifestos in history against censorship. His objective was not a specific government, but the mere idea that a state should decide what individuals could and could not read. At the time, all publications published in England had to be certified by the government. The excuse was always the same: to safeguard the people from hazardous ideas. Milton shattered this logic with a frank statement: it is not books that should be judged before they are read, but readers who should learn to judge what they read. His argument was daring. He was not only defending the right to publish without authorization, but also saying that truth does not need protection. For him, any thought that needs to be guarded from criticism is not powerful enough to survive on its own. This notion rendered censorship not a method for preserving society, but a tool for restraining those who feared free thought. His arguments were perilous for any dictatorship that depended on ignorance to preserve itself. The book was regarded with disdain, and its publication had no immediate influence, but the ideals inherent in it survived. Centuries later, they served as the basis for the First Amendment of the United States Constitution and continue to be a reference anytime freedom of expression is endangered. The reason Areopagitica was attacked at the time is the same reason it continues to be contested today. Governments still claim that certain information should be regulated for the common good. Censorship never disappeared. It merely altered its form. Reading this book is to comprehend that the war against the control of ideas did not begin in the 20th century, nor did it stop with the digital age. Whenever an authority tries to dictate which voices can be heard, Milton's philosophy continues to be an antidote. But while Milton opposed censorship, the following book on this list highlighted something even more disturbing: that control of society may be done without force, without tyrants, without outright censorship, merely with distraction and pleasure. Brave New World. If George Orwell warned us about a future of ruthless repression, Aldous Huxley showed us something even more dangerous: a society where people do not need to be monitored because they do not wish to resist. Brave New World was forbidden in various nations, not because it represented a murderous dictatorship, but because it disclosed an inconvenient truth: voluntary slavery is the most efficient form of control. The book envisions a civilization where there is no violence, no poverty, and everyone seems content. But this bliss comes at a price. Critical thinking has been replaced by continual entertainment. Conflict has been removed with a perfect medicine. Soma and any type of suffering or inquiry is soon smothered. There is no obvious oppression since individuals do not need to be coerced to comply. They want to obey. This makes Huxley's work an unsettling mirror. Unlike typical dystopias where there is a visible enemy to be battled, here the enemy lies within the human being itself. There is no need for a thought police like in 1984, because no one has thoughts that upset them. Censorship does not originate from an authoritarian regime, but from distraction and superficiality. This is exactly what made Brave New World regarded scary. The book was prohibited in schools in the United States and in nations like Ireland because it discusses issues such as drugs, sex, and psychological manipulation. But the actual cause for its restriction is not in these elements. It is in its primary message. The novel proposes that when pleasure is enormous and consistent, freedom ceases to be a desire. Huxley did not merely create fiction about a distant future. He recognized a pattern that may be seen in the present, a world where people do not read because they are too busy with digital distractions. where debate has been substituted with meaningless slogans, and where the promise of quick enjoyment is utilized as a tactic of control. Reading Brave New World today is an exercise in deconstruction. Huxley forces the reader to examine whether modern society actually values freedom or whether it prefers the illusion of security and comfort. The book's strongest warning is not about a tyrannical government, but about the human tendency to indulge in pleasure until it entirely loses interest in anything else. And while Huxley showed us how entertainment can be a means of control, the next author on this list highlighted something even more disturbing, that the whole concept of morality can be an illusion designed to justify authority. Now, let's discuss about Niccolò Machiavelli. The Prince. There's a reason Machiavellian has become synonymous with manipulation and cold strategy. Few texts have been as misunderstood. The Prince doesn't encourage cruelty or corruption. It just describes power as it is, not as it should be. This ruthless honesty led to its censorship, prohibitions, and condemnation as a tyrant's playbook. Machiavelli authored The Prince in 16th century Italy, a time of political instability. Unlike idealized treatises on administration, he investigated how rulers actually achieved and kept power. His conclusion was unsettling. Strong leaders don't follow traditional morality. They can't afford to be naive or guided by sentimentality. Instead, they must be strategic, knowing when to act brutally and when to appear good. The Catholic Church banned the book, fearing its influence. Monarchs and religious leaders decried it because it highlighted the realities of power. Manipulation supports nations. Yet, despite its restriction, The Prince became widely researched. Napoleon, dictators, statesmen, and even modern CEOs apply its teachings. So why read Machiavelli? Because he explains how power works, enabling us recognize its dynamics rather than be ignorant. He doesn't preach immorality, just the truth that compassion alone rarely survives in politics. Next, we investigate David Hume and dialogues concerning natural religion. Questioning faith was formerly a death sentence. For centuries, dogmas weren't supported by argument, but by fear. Amidst this, David Hume ventured the unthinkable, rationally destroying the basis of faith. His dialogues concerning natural religion was more than a book. It was a direct challenge to theological assumptions, resulting to its censure and suppression. Hume was neither a violent atheist nor a simple provocateur. He simply asked, can we prove God's existence by reason alone? The Church considered this as hazardous. Traditional Christian theology said the universe's order revealed a creator. Hume rejected this, stating that an orderly universe does not entail conscious design. His discussions probed intelligent design, the origin of evil, and belief itself, revealing how our views frequently stem from habit and emotion rather than reasoning. His work wasn't an attack on religion, but a plea for intellectual honesty. He didn't advise rejection of faith, merely that belief without investigation lacks intellectual meaning. The censoring of Hume's ideas showed a broader truth. Harmful ideas persist. Banning books does not eliminate them. It often enhances them. History proves this. Nietzsche exposed morality as a creation of power. Thomas Paine challenged the divine authority of rulers, encouraging revolutions. John Milton championed free speech when it hardly existed. Aldous Huxley warned of control by distraction. Machiavelli proved power thrives on tactics, not morals. Hume forced religious ideas to change. If these books were prohibited, it wasn't because they were false, but because they were hazardous to people who depend on mindless obedience. Reading a forbidden book isn't just rebellion, it's an act of intellectual autonomy. It forces us to question, to consider. Now, the option is yours. Follow the road established by others, or read these works and discover why those who sought to delete them always fail.